Let's say you were suddenly hired as the CEO of EA Games. Congratulations! You now have lots of control over the company, but also lots of control over its games, and lots of responsibility. Your first day on the job, you can choose one and only one thing to add to Star Wars Squadrons. What would it be? I gave my answer to this question a little later in this video. People are calling Star Wars Squadrons EA's budget game, although with video games being ridiculously expensive to develop, not sure how you can call any of this budget or cheap. Here we're talking a few less millions than the usual millions, I guess. Hey everyone, it's Andrew. Star Wars Squadrons has been out for a few weeks now, and I think it's time to take a look at how this game is performing, or rather, how much money EA are earning. How many people are playing this game? Does it have a long future, or will it forever be that niche Star Wars game played by a passionate but small player base? Let's crunch the numbers. EA were estimating Squadrons to sell 3 to 4 million copies in its first 3 months. The game has been met with positive feedback and reviews, and I think everyone can agree it's a unique Star Wars game like nothing we've had in over 20 years. But how's it selling? Well, so far Squadrons has 330,000 PS4 players, and on Steam the all-time peak of players playing at any one time was 35,700 on release day. Since then there's been a steady but quite rapid decline in the peak, which is currently sitting at around 4,500. On its opening day, Squadrons came in second in sales, just behind Among Us taking the top spot, though it was the #1 seller on the US sales charts. So a decent start, but is this enough to keep people playing? Are people actually going to stick around? Honestly, this drop-off in people playing has me a little worried for this game. Although we don't have data on Origin or EA Play and Xbox sales, they don't release that data, but the fact there's now only a peak of 4,500 in Steam players 3 weeks after launch is interesting. For comparison, these are the peaks for Battlefront 2 and Jedi Fallen Order at the moment on Steam. Jedi Fallen Order is nearly a year old and still has over 1,000 peak players in 24 hours, so Squadrons is only 4 times this much. But anyway, enough about numbers, not trying to bore you with numbers today, that's not the objective of today's video. Is Squadrons still going to have a player base in a few months for you to be a part of? Will you still be able to easily find matches? Because it's cross-platform, the answer to this is yes, definitely. Of course it will. But anyway, I just appeared on the UPLINK podcast run by Sage Goodwin, previously the Star Wars Battlefront podcast. He's a member of Bomb Squadron as well. We flew together in Operation Ace, for all those who watched that, and I thought we had a really interesting conversation. That's what this is. We talked about stuff like how Squadrons was marketed and how there's no planned DLC. Sage brought up how Battlefront 2 Starfighter Assault was similar in that once Battlefront 2 came out, the game mode never really received any ongoing support, even though Starfighter Assault was awesome. Everyone loved it. Apart from those really one-sided games you could get. They sucked, but this game mode slowly died because there was no live service for it, there was no updates, there was very little support. So will Squadrons have a similar fate? Could esports or private matches build a stronger Squadrons community? Today's episode of Bombastic is sponsored by The Ridge, my favorite wallet. I absolutely love using this. It has a sleek, minimalist design, and I swear these things are from the future. Looks so cool. Go to ridge.com/bombastic and use the code bombastic to get 10% off with free shipping. Details in the description. Thank you for sponsoring this video. Longtime sponsor The Ridge. Love you guys. Okay, strap in. Here we go.
So originally they launched the game. They said, hey, this is going to be like a game in the 90s. You're going to pay $40 and you're going to get the game. That's it. Now that we've gotten the game, there have been a huge outcry for continued support. Originally, in an interview with Upload VR, Ian Fraser has confirmed that the team is not treating Squadrons as a live service, which is a huge shame. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a shame. I'm not sure how big the community outcry for more content has been in terms of numbers, because obviously you see a couple people and, you know, suddenly that equates to just a very vocal minority, possibly.
Well, you do have Sam
really
Witwer, who is a huge voice. He has gone to Twitter and promoted that he would love more content, and he's a huge voice.
Yeah, I retweeted that actually. That's true. That's very true. the game honestly deserves it from a personal perspective. I'd love to see more content in the game. Yes, they've taken a very old school approach with this and have never really written it off. Like, I think Ian Fraser's been very transparent about saying that, yes, there are no current plans, 100% there's no current plans, and this is a standalone. You buy the game, you got the game, but they don't want to rule it out because anything's possible. And if the game were to outperform sales expectations, which is something I'm really curious to see.
Definitely.
Every quarter, EA has their, what are they called? The earnings calls with all the investors, where basically the EA executives share how much the company has profited, how they're doing, how EA, how many copies they've sold of each game. So when the one comes out for the quarter Squadrons was released in, I'm really curious to see how many people have actually gone and bought this game. They were estimating, I think, 3 to 4 million people. For comparison, Jedi Fallen Order, they were estimating 6 to 8 million copies sold. And that game ended up selling about 10 million in 3 months or in that quarter. So fingers crossed this game will do similar, overwhelm their expectations, and we'll get more content. It's interesting as well, I think, how similar this actually is to some of those old X-Wing and TIE Fighter games from the 90s. In the weeks leading up to Squadron's release, I'd never played those games, and I went back and played them, and they do have like an even steeper learning curve than Squadrons. They're obviously much older games, much more difficult, much less accessible to the modern gamer. Even to back then, I was only real young back then, but I can't imagine having played those games. And it's interesting how many elements, from the briefing rooms to being in first person only, to some of the cockpit controls, to even the mission objectives, the inspiration that's been taken from these games is, Squadrons is basically a slightly more accessible, updated version of those old X-Wing and TIE Fighter games.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it channels them very well. Like you and like a lot of people, a lot of creators, we're super curious to see how well it performs. I mean, from a critic's perspective, it's doing very well. IGN gave it an 8 out of 10. Our podcast, the last episode, I had friend of the podcast, Split Screen, and Ethan on, and we gave our ratings, and combined, we gave it an 8.16. So we got it around that point. Very
specific.
Yeah, so we each gave it our ratings, and then I combined them and divided them by 3. And 8.16 is what we came to.
That's cool. Damn.
It's a really good game. Like, critically, it's doing very well. I will say it's sad to see a vocal minority equate the release of Squadrons and the end of Battlefront 2. Like, games don't get made in a couple months. Like, this game was in production since Battlefront 2 launched or before, and we're getting around 3 years here. So they've been developing the game for at least 2 years.
I didn't actually know that. I know there was a lot of talk, or like people were like commenting, saying basically that this game was rushed and this game was just EA. Oh, they're trying to get out another Star Wars game kind of thing. It's a broken, rushed game. And the game has launched, as lots of you probably know, it does have several bugs and has had a few issues in the launch. I've experienced a few. I've had a few crashes, a few other issues. Those are being sorted with some patches that are dropping into the game. But I don't think it's fair to say that this is just like pencil pusher kind of like, let's just get another game out and earn some cash.
Yeah, definitely.
This is an authentic, very, very, it's a very kind of, much more niche Star Wars game than perhaps Battlefront or even Jedi Fallen Order, but it's an experience that, is so well worth the development cost and time and has delivered such a unique experience like we've never had before. The fact the entire game is in VR is, astounding. And if you have the VR headset, or even if you don't have one, I'd even recommend getting one for this, because it's such a unique experience that you've never had. You've definitely never had this.
100%.
Yeah.
Before we get into Squadrons and the scope of like continuation of Star Wars games, one thing I want to note is the correlations between Battlefront 2 and Squadrons. There's one clear one, and that was with Starfighter Assault, and how when it came out, it was a super solid game. Gameplay was great. The feel of the vehicles were awesome, but then there was no support, and that game mode died. And now we're in the same position where we've got Squadrons. Great game, great gameplay. All of the vehicles feel fantastic, but no support. So it'll be interesting to see how that lack of support affects the game going forward in the community. I think it's difficult to expect a game in 2020 and the way games are made now to have a game come out and not have any support and then still be viable as a community later on. So it'll be interesting to see that.
I agree, but that said, Squadrons has so much more depth than Starfighter Assault.
Oh, definitely.
So much more customization, such a deeper combat system. You know, the different classes all feel different. The teamwork, you know, Starfighter Assault never had this kind of teamwork and this kind of coordination required. So I don't know, like you could compare the two in terms of saying, yeah, then neither were supported after launch. But at the same time, I think Squadrons, especially if it develops a strong esports community or even like just a competitive community, even if it's not necessarily termed as esports. If the competitive side of this game is, I think, why it's such a memorable experience playing it. And, you know, getting together, like I said, you need to play this with friends, getting together with a squadron of friends, or even just people you find online. Like if you're in a Discord server and you join up with some people in there, like you're going to have the most fun in this game playing with the squad and communicating and working out how to win, basically, and, you know, strategizing how to win.
That is an excellent point to be made. Didn't even think about the esports. Please add private
well, honestly,
matches.
Exactly. That's 100% what it needs for this game to have that kind of longevity. If they could only update one piece of content into the game, I would choose it to be private
100%.
matches. No more new starfighters, no new maps, forget that stuff. Like, let's just get the private matches game mode and enable people to play the game how they want, have the tournaments, have the esports, have the competitive side of it really just come to the forefront.
That will be a game changer if they do add that. That would make the huge Squadrons is perfect for esports. 5v5, boom. You can have dogfights, fleet battles, what have you. But without private matches, it kills the viability of any furthering of the sport. So
yeah, it's interesting as well. Like when Battlefront 2 launched, this was one of the biggest requests, basically, apart from everything else that's going on with that game. We're not going to get into that again, but everyone was always asking for private matches again because, you know, Battlefront 2015 had them and so many people use them. I used to use them to film the short films and machinima I used to do, and I know so many people used to do other challenges in them. They used to, you know, just have private matches with their friends, Heroes of Villains stuff, everything, right? Whereas this game, Battlefront 2 didn't have them. This game still doesn't have them. You know, maybe that'll change. I hope so.
I hope so too.
So that was just part of my chat on the UPLINK podcast with Sage. And you can find the rest of this podcast on their YouTube page. Link to that down below. Would really recommend you check out the podcast. They've had some amazing guests on, like other YouTubers, Battlefront 2 devs, and lots more people. But thanks for watching and listening to this. My name's Andrew. I'll catch you soon.
Stay bombastic.